All right, guys, we are back. So now we're gonna get into actually start wiring up this Firebase authorization. So let me bring up. All right, let's see what we're gonna use here. All right, so let's start off by writing up our first context file, right? Authorization context. So let's go ahead and close everything that we have right now. Yeah, close everything, close all, just so we can start from a fresh thing. So open up its source folder here, and then in our source folder, we're gonna create our first a new folder. We're gonna call it context. And inside our new context, we're gonna create a file. And we're gonna name it auth context. .js. JSX. Yeah, we'll make it a JSX file. All right. So our JSX file is basically, it's still going to be a React file. That's why it's a JSX. Normally, when it's just a straight up JavaScript, it doesn't have any exports, importing of React or importing of any kind of React modules or anything like that. Then I just leave it as a JS. Okay. So the first thing we're going to need to do here is, well, let's go ahead and build it as an auth context file, but then we're going to bring a couple of things in here that we know we're going to need eventually. So we're going to bring in the use effect, we're going to bring the use state, and we're going to bring another hook called use context right there. All right, so now that we have that available, we're gonna need to access our authorizations files from Firebase and a couple of methods that are going to be available to us. So in order to get there, before we get there, let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to the Firebase and start bringing in the functions that we're gonna need to log in and log out. So we're gonna need a new file. We're gonna call it auth JS, and this is just the JavaScript folder file. So there is no reacting here, basically. All right, so what we're going to bring in here is that we're going to bring in auth from Firebase. It's not in here. So we're going to import auth from Firebase. There you go. Import auth from Firebase. And then we're going to import the sign in method, which is not that one. Sign in with email and password. Sign in with email and password from Firebase auth. Stay right there. All right, cool. So now that we have that, we can start writing our our functions. So our functions is going to be pretty simple. The first one, we're going to export them all. So it's going to be a sign. We're going to call a sign in, and we're going to take as an argument the email and the password. It's incredible how AI is just doing this. All right, but let's not get crazy and just automatically trust everything that the AI is going to give us. Okay. All right. So once we have the email and password, we're going to bring in a couple of methods. We're going to bring a method here called sign in with email and password, which is a function that comes straight from Firebase. But before we do that, we got to make sure that we wrap this stuff into a try catch. So I'm gonna have a try catch here spit out, and then inside this try catch I'm gonna create a const, and I'm gonna call this user credential, just like that. And this user credential is going to await a saying this function right here, the sign in with email and password, and it's going to pass the auth as well as the this auth that we just from Firebase, so it can basically verify that we are able to log in, and then the email and the password is going to catch this stuff here and match it up to this and make sure that this person is allowed to go in there. Once we do that, we can just basically get rid of this, all the AI crap. All right, so once we do that, we're gonna need to return the user credential, but we're gonna break it. We're gonna destructure it to a user just like this. we're gonna destructure the user, and then from the user we're gonna bring, from these user credentials, we're gonna bring the user, and we're gonna store it into something called user. Okay, then the catch error, which is basically going to return an error message, just like that. Okay, so if there's an error, it's gonna catch it and it's gonna return this, and this is not gonna happen. Now, every time we use an await, then you have to use the function as an async await. All right, so you need to bring it as an async, and then it's going to await the result. So this function is going to work asynchronously, so that other stuff is still work, and this is going to work in itself asynchronously from the other. So it has its own job to do. It's going to run by itself, uninterrupted. Nobody's going to mess around with it. It doesn't have to wait. It doesn't depend on anything else. It just runs on its side while everything else is doing whatever else. So this alone this alone should be able to sign the person in and run to this try catch right here, and then run this function, taking consideration the password, the email, and whether the person is authorized based on the authorization configuration that we have in the Firebase file, based on this stuff right here. And then if all of that matches, it's going to return the user credential user and put it in, basically we're going to use the user out of it. If not, then there's going to throw an error. If it throws an error, then it's going to be stored here in the error. Okay, we can try to log these things out if you want to. You can go ahead and before the return, you can do a log console user credential user, so you can figure out who you're dealing with, right? You can see the user's information from there, basically the email, stuff like that. And as well as you can console log the error, just so it's easy for you to figure out what's going on. So like if it does fail and it does throw an error, you want to make sure that you console log it so that you can see what the error is to begin with, right? All right, so now that we have that, we're gonna build a different one. We're not gonna build a sign up, so we're gonna export const sign out, yep, sign out. And this one is going to be an async await as well. And then we're gonna also do a try catch. Looks about right. All right, let's figure this out. So we're gonna run another try catch just like this one. So when I use this function, when I fire this function out, it's going to run through this right here, and it's going to await this call to the authorization file and just fire this this function directly from Firebase. And that is basically all you need to do. Once you do that, I guess you don't even need the return success or anything like that. And this is always good to have, so I guess it's cool. And that's it. This is basically all you really need, and there's nothing to it. All right, so we can go ahead and save this. Now that we've done this, we can go back and close this. We can go back to this, and now we can go ahead and use it or call it from our for our use. So from here, we're gonna auth into. Nope, that's not it. We're gonna auth import from Firebase auth. There you go. That's the one. All right, so we're gonna make sure that we call our Firebase from our auth from Firebase. Wait a minute, that's not the same auth. We're gonna bring in I'm getting confused. We're gonna bring the Firebase from Firebase. This auth doesn't exist in here. I got confused because the name is similar. Oh, the same, not really. But this auth is from Firebase. It's this one. Okay, this is the auth that we're bringing in. So my apologies on that one. All right, and then now that we've done that, we're gonna import the onAuth state changed. There you go. On-auth state change from Firebase auth. So what this function is going to do is it's going to allow us to check or do something when the authorization state changes. So if if it changed from logged in to logged out or from logged out to logged in. All right. And all right, we can just we're fine with that for right now. All right, so now inside the well, actually we're gonna need to bring in a couple of things too. So we're gonna need to create a context, and there it is right there. So I'm just gonna tab into it. We're gonna call an auth context where we're going to create context from it, right? Using React, we're gonna create a context, and then we're gonna export. We could use that one, I guess. We're gonna export. Yeah, we're gonna use that. Export a function where for context where it's going to return the use context using this auth context into this one. All right. Now this guy right here is the one that I messed up on. I shouldn't have called it that. I should call it auth provider actually. So we're gonna go ahead and just make sure that I have my notes correctly here. Yep. I'm gonna name this one and the one at the bottom auth provider. And now that auth context is no longer a problem. It's not speed. It's not competing against the one that was here, even though the file is called auth context. If it makes you feel any better, you can name this auth provider, to be honest. And it should actually, you know what? It should, just for the sake of not, there you go. For the sake of not confusing ourselves, we're gonna call it auth provider. All right, so now that we're bringing all of this into an auth provider, then the last thing we're gonna need now, not the last thing, but the next thing we're gonna need now is we need to pass in here a few things. So let's start with the states that we're gonna need. We're gonna need to check for a current user, which is exactly what you see there. And the first value of the current user is gonna be instantiated as null. So we want our state for the current users to be empty, okay? Then we're gonna bring in the login. Well, we're gonna bring in different user, whether the user is logged in or not. So we're gonna say user logged in, and then set it to user logged in false, so that we always assume that no one is logged in. And then the loading, which is always good to have, because while someone is logging in and out, you want to be able to run a loading function and then wait for things to are available, and then the loading ends, right? So that way people don't think that something broke. All right, so while that is done, we got to bring in now on a use effect function. So we're gonna bring in a use effects function. So let's start with yeah, this is actually correct. All right, so let's start off with what is a use effect function. All right, you know, let's just not do this right now. We'll do that in a minute. The use effect function is basically an onload thing. It's like if you started from JavaScript, then you know that JavaScript has a function called onload. If you started from jQuery, then you know that jQuery has a a function called document ready. So basically, the React has the same thing. It's a life cycle. For the very beginning of React, before the use hooks became the way to do things, we had component did mount. So, and pretty much any system out there has some kind of way in the life cycle to figure out when it's the loading stage of that page or of that application, right? So so that way you can load things on first and have them ready before the rest of the page starts to work, because you're gonna need dependencies. You're gonna need things to be in place for something else to work. So what we're going to do here is we're gonna create an on stage, an on auth stage, and then we're gonna pass it a couple of things. But before we pass it a couple of things, we're gonna create we're gonna initialize the user to begin with. So let's just above the here, let's create an async function, and then we're gonna call it initialize user. All right, and then for in here we're going to bring in the user. All right, so now we're going to set up inside here, we're gonna bring in a condition, right? And then we're gonna say if the user right, that means if the user exists, if there is a user, go ahead and set current, which is this, set current to user. So if the user exists, make it the current user. So when you set the current user to the user, this right here becomes the user. So we're basically grabbing the data that is coming in and we're mutating this state with this mutator so that this state adopts that value. So now this is the same thing as this. Okay, so that's the first thing we're gonna do, and then we're also gonna use the login here, and we're gonna set the login to true. This set the user login to true. Now else, exactly that, set the current users back to null, and set the user login back to false. Reset, basically, it's a reset. All right, now the last thing we're gonna need is gonna be set the loading. When you all do all of this, it's gonna be set the loading to false. Okay, so this is how you use the states inside of this initialize user. So now that we created this helper function in here, you can go back to the auth state where you where we started creating it here. And one more thing that we need to do is that we need to create let me check on my notes to make sure that I'm okay. We'll see in a minute. All right, so so now that we're here, we're gonna need to get an on state, and then in the auth state, we're gonna pass the auth, and then we're gonna pass the initialize user. Okay, so now this right here and this right here is gonna run the auth and the authorization file configurations plus the user that is initialized going to be passed as an argument every time the authorization changes. The state of the authorization changes. Now we don't want this to run all the time, right? We want this to run just whenever it changes on the authorization. So we're gonna create it. We're gonna create an unsubscribe so that once it's already run, unsubscribe. So once it has already run, then we can use a return unsubscribe to basically kill this method from running over and over and over, right? So it just needs to run once. And I don't mean run once after it loads, I mean run once it's done. Once it has already done, you can reload the page again, and normally a use effect would run all over again because it did another page load, but this won't run because you unsubscribed for it. So this basically tells you run this on load and then unsubscribe. So for as long as this is true, it doesn't matter how many times you run the page load again, it won't work again. But it will if it's not true. If it's false, it will work again because it's running. It's depending on this. So if the user exists, then this is true. If this is true, no need to run it. Just unsubscribe it. No need to run it on page load all the time. If this falls on here as a false, then this is false. And if this is false, then this is unsubscribe. Doesn't work. That means on page load, do it again. Okay, it's a beautiful thing, this lifecycle stuff. All right, so now that we've done that, we are ready to actually use this as a as the provider. So we're gonna bring in the auth context provider, and we're gonna give it that value that you see right there. And then, yep, that's pretty much it. All right, so what's happening here is what's going on with the children? Oh, okay, so it's a prop. Because it's a prop, we need to be able to pass it out. So we're gonna bring in the children and pass it as a prop. And of course, the input props thing, prop types, which means it has to be there. I don't believe, yeah, it's required, of course. All right, so loading if it's not loaded. Okay, so basically what's gonna happen here is the auth context is gonna run the provider. The provider has to have a value, and that value is basically going to be the current user or the user logged in. Actually, it needs the what I'll do is instead of destructing it in here, I'll create a grouping of value, and I'll create inside the value, I create and then I'll add the current user the logged in, and I'll also create one for, and I also store the loading state in there. So now I can basically check in here for the value. There you go. I like that better. All right. Now, as far as this right here, I wanted to check, and if it's not loading, show me children. Yeah. All right, let's figure out why this is causing issues. Oh, it's in the wrong place. I put it in the use auth. It's not supposed to be there. It's part of the provider. There you go. It's part of the auth provider, not part of the use auth. All right, so now that it is there, everything is fine, everything is running. So this provider has been built. Now that provider has been built, then I can go now to my app.js. Yes, I have to go to my app.js, and I have to make sure that I use my provider here. So what I'm going to do up here is I am going to bring the provider auth provider, there you go, the auth provider from provider, and then I'm going to encapsulate that as entire thing into auth provider. So once I wrap my entire app into an auth provider, I am giving my auth provider power over the entire application, so that I can check inside the entire application whether my authorization is true or not, and all that good stuff. All right, so let's make sure that I am on track here. So the auth provider is an internal export, so that's plus other exports that are in there, so that's got to be done this way, and all of this is good. All right, cool. All right, so let's see where we are here with our application. If we run it again, we don't see nothing. All right, let's figure out if maybe this is fine. All right, syntax as a request, small auth provider just does not have an export name auth provider. All right, let's figure out what happened for our auth provider. So if I go to my contacts, export, I didn't export it. All right, and now it's working. All right, cool. So I didn't export it, therefore it didn't work. Yeah, that's a simple enough. All right, so now that we have this right here, we supposedly we have access to our stuff, right? Now we got to do a couple of things. We have to work with the form to make sure that the form can log us in. So the first thing that we need to do is going to be to create a way for our form in here to actually detect the content inside this inside this input field, so that it can capture the value that we're driving in there. So we need to go back to our components and into the form group. And now into the form group and this input file here, we're gonna bring in an onChange. and then we're going to pass it out as onChange. Okay, and we're going to add it to the onChange list of props, and we're gonna give that up to it. There you go. I wonder if it's required. I mean, yes and no. Do you want, technically it should be required that every time you have an input field, you should be able to do something with the stuff that's inside it. But I don't want to do that, because sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't want the input field to actually do anything on change or anything like that. Sometimes you just want to, it to be there to collect stuff, but not really do anything with it. I don't know. It's just, and plus it doesn't seem like it's necessary, like it's required. Also, as you're developing, if you don't put the onChange there, but you declare it as required, then you're gonna run into issues. So I'd rather not. So I'm just gonna leave it like that. All right. So now that we have that in there, the next thing we have to do is we have to go to the right side. We have to go in this area, and where we have the form, right? Is that where we put it? So if we go to the navbar and we go to the right side, and we have the custom button here. Okay, so we have to do a couple of things to the custom button. That's what we got to do. We have to pass, right now we have this custom button hard coded so that it says sign in, and it runs an on click, well, basically sign in. So it says sign in. We don't want it to always say sign in. We want it to say sign in or sign out. We want it to flip, right? So instead of hard coding that custom button to do that, we're gonna call it label, and then we're gonna, just you guessed it, we're gonna pass it to the parent. We did this already actually with the custom button. So if you remember, the custom button had its own text that we passed it on to here, and now here we use it as text, and then we give it a value. But now yet we are hijacking this prop that we already passed here to pass it one level further as a label with a name label, so that we can use it in wherever we're using the right side. So we are using the right side in the navbar, right? Yeah, right here. So we are using the right side in the navbar. So now here in the navbar, we can grab this here and call it, and call the label, and say, well, first before, okay, so you can see back here that it's already, let's close this. You can see already that it's gone, right? But we can go ahead and say sign in, and it should be back in a minute. Oh, because I misspelled this label, and there it is, it's back now. So I'm just basically hijacking the prop. Now, why the hell am I doing this? Well, the reason I'm doing this is because eventually we're gonna do this here. We're gonna bring this button right here, and we have two ways that we can do this. We can either duplicate the buttons and say if the user is logged in, do this, or if it's not logged in, do that, right? We could do this, and we can basically just load one entire button if the user is logged in, one exact entire different button if the user is logged out. We can do it this way. Or basically we can do this ternary function in here so that it can get a value of, so that the button remains, but the label is the one that changes on the condition, and the on click also changes on the condition. I like that way better. So eventually we're gonna do that, but for right now, I don't want to confuse you. I'm going to leave it with nothing on. I think that's gonna be the next thing we're gonna work on, but there's still other things that I have to do first. I have to be able to collect the information. I I have to be able to collect the information from here first to begin with. Okay, so let's go to our form group and see what we did first. So we made sure here in our form group that we were able to now capture an on-change event in our form group. So if we go back here again and notice that we don't have it, now we have access to an on-change event. Now this on-change event is going to capture, which we haven't done it yet, the value that is inside the field for this field right here, the email field. So we gotta set up a few things here. We're gonna set up a couple of what am I calling here? States. A couple of states. We're gonna set up a couple of states. One of them is going to be const email. There you go. Email set to email. Okay. And then the other one is going to be the password set to password. All right. So now that we have that, we can come down here to the change, and then we're gonna say on change we're going to set the email. Let me just make sure that should be the last. No, I'll do that now. I'm gonna bring in so that this set, it runs the set email, and then in here what we're going to do is we're going to bring the event, and then we're going to call the event target value. So what this is going to do is it's going to capture this, the event, everything, the target value in here, right? And it's going to pass it to that set email. It's going to set it so that it can mutate this email field right here, this email value, and then that email will carry whatever you type in there. Now we got to do the same thing for passwords. So we're gonna grab this. I'll grab the whole thing, but this one is going to be set password. All right, cool. Looking good. Looking good. Looking good. Looking good. All right, let's make sure everything is looking good. Yep. All right, so now that we have here, we have this primary click, which is going to be this one. This is the one that's actually going to log us in. Now, in order for us to log in, right, first of all, we're going to run this in its own function. So instead of running it on a function that is inside there, we're going to run a handle login function. Call it a handle login function. We're going to save that. That's going to break because it says that it doesn't exist. There's no login function. And then now we're going to create a login function here. There you go, const handle login. Let's see what it does. It's going to do a console log. Alright, so now for your console login, we're going to do a couple of things here. We have to get the user credential from and fire that signing function that we created back in the auth file, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to remember we did this here, right? So we got to bring this sign in from this auth. Now, in order for that to happen, there's a couple of things just to make sure here. Yeah, you have to make sure that the use authorization, the use auth from the auth context or the auth provider, I should say, that this is available, right? That this hook is available, and then in the auth from Firebase, the authorization file from Firebase. So we're gonna come over here. Now we're gonna say import. The first thing you want to import, let's import first auth from Firebase. Sure, why not? We definitely need that one. Nope, we don't need this one. Let's import the use auth. Use auth from the provider, correct? And then the last thing, and then the last thing we need is going to be, we're gonna import the sign in from the Firebase authorization. There you go. So we have the sign in, and now what we're going to do is we're gonna come back down here to the to the login function, and we're going to run an asynchronous function in here where we're going to run a try catch also. So we're going to check first that we can log in, and if it doesn't log in, it'll throw an error, and then we can catch that error down here. So right here, we're going to bring in the user credentials, user credential, and then we're going to await, because it's an asynchronous call, we're going to await the email and the password. That's correct. All right, so now that we did that, why is this? Let's just put that in there so it shuts up. That's all you really need to do with that anyway. Just console log the error message. But anyway, we go back to this right here. All right, so now while we're here, we're gonna run a couple of checks. We're gonna say if the user credential, we don't need the user. If the user credential exists, but if there are user credentials when you run the sign-in function, and if you do come up with the user credential on the response, then go ahead and set the dialog open to false. Basically close the dialog, right? Because you logged in, you don't need the dialog open anymore. You can close it. But just to make sure that we did everything correctly, we're gonna go ahead and log to the console the user credentials and call it also user is logged in. User is logged in, and then the user credentials, and then we're gonna do an else here. If not, then throw a new error, user is not logged in. Correct, just like that. Now if all of that fails and there's an error, it catches an error, I wanted to console log the error as well. So I'm gonna do a console log and then error logging in. Yeah, that's fine. Error logging in and then error message. Then delete this line down here. All right, I like that better. All right, so now that we have that handle login for the sign in, so now let's look at down here and see what we have. Here on the primary handle login. Okay, yeah, perfect. All right, let's just make sure that everything's copacetic, and let's save that. And we have an error. We have an error from the auth coming from Firebase. All right. So this auth is supposed to come from okay. So it just needed an extra push, and Firebase auth. All right. Okay. Well, now let's see. Let's inspect this so we can have it always available. There's a bunch of stuff here that is wrong. All right, we can figure that out eventually. What the handle login is not defined. All right, let's see. Oh, that's from when we were developing this whole thing. All right, so now go ahead and sign in, and first we need to create a user. If we don't have a user to actually log in with, then it's gonna say no. All right, so we're gonna create a new user here, and we're just gonna make it simple. We're gonna call it QQQ at QQQ.QQQ, only because the Q is close to my finger. And then for password, QQQ, and add the user. All right, so that user is added. Now let's see if we actually make this happen. So I'm gonna QQQ at QQQ.QQQ, and the password is QQQ. Sign in. All right, and sure, save it. Now obviously, you know, there's no indications that you say that you logged in, but if we look at the console log, it shows here all the information, all the user credentials. You see the email, no password, obviously you don't see that, but you see a lot of metadata in here. You see the display name, all of that stuff. So everything, all the information you're gonna need, the UID for the user, all of that stuff is gonna be there. So that basically tells us that the user is logged in. Okay, so that worked. So now that that worked, now that we know that we have access to that, now we have to find a way to log out. All right, so what we have to do is from the sign in, we have to bring in the sign out also from the Firebase auth, right? This one. So we brought this one in. Now we need to bring this one in. All right. So now that we have the auth out, now we got to create another function, and this one is going to be the handle sign out. Yeah, let's call it handle sign out. Const handle sign out, and that's also going to be an asynchronous function. And let's see what we got here. Nah, we don't need any of that. All right, so first thing we have to do is just basically just call straight up sign out, and then in the sign out we're gonna pass the authorization so that it uses the authorization to make sure that the user can be signed out, and then it signs out that person. All right, now when that happens, we wanted to do something, so we're gonna do a then catch instead of a try catch. So on the then, we're gonna run a function init my god, I can't type right now. And then what we wanted to do is the console log user, console log the user signed out, or signed out successful, whatever you want to call it. All right, and that basically just closes here. Yep. And now we want to run a catch. There you go, catch error, console log error signing out error message. Instead of a log, just do error so that it can actually do a read. And same thing for this one, do error. And if actually this one right here on the auth, do error, get in the habit of using console error for error messages. That way they'll be here, it will be red. All right, so back to, let's just save that, back to the nav. All right, so in the nav right here, everything is copacetic as far as I can tell, but we have to use that function, right? So it exists, but it's not really being used anywhere. See, it's declared, but value is never read. So how we're going to do this, we're going to, we have to make it work now within the button, right? So let me bring my code here, my notes, so that I can guide you correctly. All right, let me make sure. All right, so let's create from here, let's create a const called current user, current user use auth. Okay, you can call it current user. Let's call it user logged in, just to be more specific about what it's doing, right? So now that that's done, let's go ahead and run now a check, right? First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go to the right side button down here. Remember when I said this button right here, which is this button right here? Sorry, not that one. That's the one for the this one. This button right here. It either should say sign in, but if you're already signed in, it should say sign out. So that user logged in that we just created, this one right here, we're going to check for that. So we're going to come over here and we're going to take this out, and then we're gonna basically do exactly what it says there. We're gonna say if the user is logged in, show sign out, or obviously it's signed out, use signed in. So let's see if that changes. And here you go. And now it says sign out. It says sign out because we're signed in. But if we click on it, nothing happens. It brings this modal back up again. So because it's doing this on click. So we have to do the exact same thing. We have to bring in, we have to say if the user is logged in, let's see if it figures it out. No, it didn't. Are you gonna figure it out? It didn't. So if the user is logged in, handle sign out, If not, then open the, what is it, the set dialog, yeah, set dialog open to true. So basically this is saying if the user is logged in, then run the sign out function on that click. But if the user is not logged in, meaning it's, you know, it's out, it's logged out, then run this function right here so that it can open the dialog. So if I hit this, pay attention to what it says here. If I hit sign out, user signed out. But if it's signed out and I hit sign in, it gives me the ability to sign in. I can go ahead and sign in, and there I am signed in. Now it says signed out. If I click on sign out, again I'm signed out again. All right, cool beans. So now we have ability to sign in and sign out. I'm gonna go ahead and stop it right here. We still have this private page that is supposed to be protected. It's supposed to be a page that only people who are signed in can see. Okay, so because we've already been spending so much time on the authorization part of this, let's go ahead and just put that in the next video. Okay, so see you in the next one, guys.